Good evening, everyone. If you're new, you don't know me, my name's Scott, and I, along with Jason Crowell, who I saw him earlier sitting right there, he and I will be co-teaching this quarter here in the auditorium. The plan is we will cover all of 1 Samuel on Wednesday nights. So I think are there 31 chapters in it? So if you do that, do the math, we're going to be covering somewhere in the neighborhood of roughly 3 chapters a setting. Tonight we're going to go through an overview. Depending on how much you guys talk, or I talk, or we don't talk, will depend or determine if we get into any of the text or not. But the plan is that we will start in the text next Wednesday night and do chapters 1 through 3. And so if you don't like the way it's divided out, that's Jason's fault. He was the one that did it. He actually typed into ChatGPT or whatever that is, and it gave out the outline for us, and so that's what we're going to follow. So that's where we will be. I just want to tell you guys that very little of what I say will be my own unique thinking or my own unique perspective on the book. A lot of it is going to come from ESV Study Bible. It's going to come from other preachers that I've listened to when they've given sermons on 1 Samuel. It's going to come from commentaries that I've got. So I guess what I'm saying is that I'm really stilling most of my material as part of this class, and so not going to be a whole lot of original stuff. I figure it's better to go with the people that have spent a lot more time in this. Certainly there will be some individual and unique perspectives that we will pull from it, but that is going to be kind of where I am. And I think Jason will likely be doing the same thing, so that'll be our plan. He does have letters after his name, though, so he's smarter than me, so it might be some original. Okay, so a study in 1 Samuel. We'll go ahead and jump in. Why? Why are we studying 1 Samuel? Okay, we got David. Why else? First of all, how old is approximately the book? Anybody got an idea? I know there are some of you that looked ahead. How old is this book? Anybody? Roughly 3,000 years old. Okay? Going to be roughly 3,000 years old. And so the question is, why in the world would we look at something that is 3,000 years old? Because unequivocally, we know more than they did 3,000 years ago. We've got better technology, and we're a more enlightened age, right? And so why would we study it? Well, God put it there for us. Romans 15:4. For whatever was written in former days was written for our instruction, that through endurance and through the encouragement of the Scriptures, we might have hope. There's a passage in Ecclesiastes 1:9 that everybody's going to be able to finish this out. There is nothing new what? Nothing new under the sun. Okay? Whenever I get a high school class, one of the things that I always tell them, and I have to remind myself of this as well, is that for those young people that are looking into the Bible, and it can seem archaic and all that, the reality is that those young Jewish boys and girls that lived at the time that they lived versus the young boys and girls that we have sitting in our assemblies, they are no different. They have the same wants, the same desires, the same needs, the same outlooks on life. As I told them, the young girls wanted to marry the most handsome boy, and the young boys wanted to marry the prettiest girl, and they wanted the best jobs, and they wanted to have a nice life. And so the reality is that people, we haven't changed, right? And so when we look at a text that's 3,000 years old, the reality is there's so much that's going to be applicable. And there's so much, if we will spend the time to look at it and to study it and to try and learn from it, there is so much that it can apply to us. Now, it says that the purpose of what was written in the former days was written that we might have hope. Hope in what? I'm sorry? Hope in eternity. Okay, Titus 1:2 talks about the hope of eternal life. Romans 12:2 talks about rejoicing in the hope. Okay? And so I hope that as we go through these next 13, there's only going to be 12 lessons in this class, 13 in the next quarter, just by the way the calendar falls. I really, really hope that when we spend our time in this, that we can walk away having looked at people under the old law, but seeing what it means for us under the perfect law of liberty and what the application is. Because I'm here to tell you, folks, this book is rich with all sorts of application, character studies, etc. And so I think if we will put our time and effort into it, it'll be a study that will be well worth our time. Okay, we're going to do a little bit of a history lesson here to kind of get us up to speed. So as I said, if you can, these maps are kind of small. Anyways, that's roughly a map there of what would be the land of the unified nation would be. Okay, and then that little section, that breakout there, is going to be the area of Ramoth where we start the book out with Hannah and Elkanah. And so that is kind of geographically where we are, a little bit northwest of the Dead Sea. And from a date setting perspective, we are somewhere in that neighborhood of 1120 to 1100. And then between 1st and 2nd Samuel, it'll take us almost to 970 BC. And so we're roughly anywhere between 130 to 150 years worth of time. Okay? And so what got us to 1 Samuel? What is the time period as we come into 1 Samuel? What has been the state of the nation? Okay, we've had judges, right? That's what we got to. How did we get to having judges? So we got 40 years of wandering, and then Joshua brings them out, right? And so Joshua leads, after Moses dies, Joshua leads the people into Canaan. And what did the people do or not do when they got into the land, Miss Gwen? Okay, they eventually want to be like the people. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight. What did they do? Okay. Overnight, they came in, took it over, right? No, they did not. Okay, that's going to be a key component that really does set the table for what the book is. Okay? After they get into the land, what does Joshua then do? Well, he basically parses out the land to the 12 tribes so that they can then have their inheritance, their land. Okay? It sounds really easy and like it was cut and dry and everything was just wrapped up in a bow. The reality is that it wasn't. Okay, this is an overview of a generalization, and it was, because of the people, it was very much hodgepodge. Now, Joshua dies, and as you said, we come into the dreary days of the judges. And I think that was from the ESV Study Bible. So from the time that Joshua dies up until we come to 1 Samuel, we are looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 300 to 350 years. Okay? And I think the description of dreary is a completely accurate one. So, if I said the term cycle of the judges, what comes to mind? Okay, you missed one part. There is a part where they actually do what is right. Very brief. So, it's hard to see here, but what John basically did say is that the people, they do what's right, they fall into apostasy, they typically go into some type of enslavement or persecution, they cry out, and the cycle goes all over again. And what happens is that somebody comes on the scene. Somebody that I will term as in parentheses here, as a savior. So, approximately in that 300 to 350 years, does anybody remember how many judges there were? And this gets you extra bonus points. I didn't know either until I started studying. So, 12 judges, okay? Othniel is our first one, followed by the star of the show, Samson, right? Because he was just a model citizen, was he not? Therein is another problem with the judges, is that not only do we have an issue with the people, okay, and their waywardness, the leaders of the land aren't exactly always stellar examples of godliness and what the Lord would have wanted for their leadership, okay? And so, as I said, this pattern of sin, it plagues the people for centuries, and it goes on and on and on, and what we're left with is that the cycle begins over and over and over. And so, what are we left with? And I believe you said it. Judges 21:25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And so that is the setting of how we come to 1 Samuel. One of the things, and one of the items that we're going to see in the book here is what is leadership. Okay, who ultimately is the leader and the king of God's people? God, right? If nobody is following, is somebody leading? So as part of my work at UPS in the past, and having been in positions where people you've had that report up through you, we've read several books, and there's a book out there called The Servant Leader, and one of the things that they talk about is that no matter how good of a leader you might be or you think you might be, if nobody's following you, you're not leading. Okay? And so the reality is the people weren't giving God an opportunity to lead them, okay, because they weren't following. And so that's going to be one of the components of leadership, though, that the good leader has to understand is when they look over their shoulder or she looks over her shoulder, are the people behind me, okay? And we're going to see this idea of good leadership and poor leadership even throughout this book, okay? And so just because we come to 1 Samuel and changes are a brewing doesn't mean that we've got a magic pill here, okay? But this is where we find ourselves. Sounds a lot like us, right, in America. I've heard it even said in this, I think from this auditorium, those exact words, is that we just kind of, everybody does what they think is right, right? Your truth is your truth, and my truth is my truth, and we're just all good. It's the same idea. And so that's why I say, even though 3,000 years ago they were doing this, we're still the same. And we're going to see it play out over and over and over. Okay? So, title and the author. Obviously, and that's really small, my apologies. So the title certainly refers to a key figure in the book. So, Samuel. In Hebrew, his name is actually pronounced Shmuel. And that's about as good as I can do on that. And so when you look at his name and what it actually means, people are kind of divided. From Hebrew scholars are kind of divided on what exactly it means, but it's a variation or derivative of the name of God or asked from God. Okay? I personally really like the second one, right? Because it just fits with who he is, right? And we're going to look at that in depth next week. And so that is his name, is Shmuel. Why call the book Samuel and not kings or Saul or David? Okay, so Captain Obvious over here says, sorry, I like giving John a hard time. So if he's in the line of fire, he's going to get it. So yes, he's a connoisseur of cheese, and you can ask him later. Will. Hold on. I'm going to stop you right there because we're going to get to that.
Sorry.
He's the kid in the back that raises his hands and knows all the answer. Why not kings or David? Or Saul? Why Samuel? This is speculation on my part, but I think it's important. This guy is, as I said of Moses in the Hebrews class, this guy is a big deal in God's plan for God's people. Okay? Yes, he doesn't take up the whole book. And ultimately, he's not the one that wears the crown. But he is the last of the judges, as it's talked about here in chapter 3, where he judges the people. He's also a prophet. Multiple places he's referred to as a seer, S-E-E-R, which would also be a prophet. And in general, prior to any of the coronations, he is a leader in the nation. Okay? And so he occupies a place of prominence. The reason, though, the next reason is why I think that when they put this book together, that his name went on the title was because of this one right here. He is the one who establishes the monarchy for the nation of Israel. Okay? Now we know God chooses the people, but it is Samuel who clearly does the coronation, who identifies them, calls them out, etc. Okay? And so when we have a people here that are ripe for change and leadership from the dreary days of the judges into a leadership that God is ultimately going to orchestrate for his people, he's the kingmaker. Okay? And so that puts him in a place of preeminence, in my opinion. And hence why his name hangs at the beginning of the book. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay. Who's the author? Who wrote Samuel? Okay. I got a Samuel. I got a Holy Spirit. That's always the right answer. Okay? That's always the right answer, but that's not the one I'm looking for. I got a Samuel. Okay. Did Samuel write all of it? And I'm putting you on the spot. But you spoke up. Okay. We got a problem. Okay. Potentially. So we've got a problem with Samuel writing the whole thing. What happens in 1 Samuel 25:1? He dies. We got chapters after that, don't we? And so likely, and you all probably can't see this, 29:30. Now the acts of King David from first to last are written in the Chronicles of Samuel the seer, and in the Chronicles of Nathan the prophet, and in the Chronicles of Gad the seer, with accounts for all his rule and his might, and of the circumstances that came upon him and upon Israel and upon all the kingdoms of the country. Okay? It's likely that whoever compiled Samuel and put it together is pulling from writings from Samuel, possibly from stuff from Nathan, potentially from Gad, other written accounts of what took place during that time. Okay? And so the reality is, the short answer is, we really don't know, okay? We really don't know. Right. Yep. And again, it's perfectly fine to pick and choose and take other writings, etc. It's at the end of the day, as you said, it is ultimately, this is God's Word. Okay. So the structure of the book. How was it? That's correct. 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 So, again, this also comes back to why we can say confidently that Samuel did not write the whole book, because what Will said, Samuel was a book. We have our friends from the Septuagint, the LXX, to thank for how we have our modern Bible today. They took 1 Samuel because it was so long, broke it into two, 1st and 2nd. Same with Kings, same with Chronicles. Okay? And so Septuagint is just the Greek translation of the Old Testament, in case you have forgotten that. So it was all one book in the original structure. And then originally they were in 4 books, it was originally one. They divided it. The authors of the scribes of the Septuagint, the translators, they did it into the 4 books of the kingdom. What does it contain? So just from an arrangement perspective, we have prose, which is just unmetered written word. Okay, it's what you're going to find. Most of it is written as prose. You're going to have poetry. You're going to see some of that. Hannah's prayer is poetic in nature. We're going to see prophecy that is involved in this book. And ultimately, we're going to have, from a historical perspective, we're going to have a time of transition. Okay? Here's where we are. Okay? From a segment perspective, 1 Samuel 1 through 7, that's going to be the story of Samuel. 1 Samuel 8 is going to be a transition to the monarchy. 1 Samuel 9 through 15, we're going to have the story of Saul. And then to finish out the book, we're going to have the story of Saul and David, and ultimately ending in the culmination of Saul's death. Okay? Okay. Any questions or comments on any of this? I know a lot of this is just kind of the minutia of getting into the book, but it does help to kind of set the stage, in my opinion. Okay. Purpose. From what you know, what's the purpose of the book? We know that it gives hope from my very first slide, but from a historical perspective, anybody got a stab at what the purpose is? Okay. Okay. And again, I didn't have a chance to run through this before. The central purpose of the book, Tony, is exactly what you're saying it. I'll say that it is God establishing the Davidic dynasty. Okay? We are going to move from a theocracy to a dynastic monarchy. What's a theocracy? Anybody remember from your history days? It's run by divinity or a certain group of people. It could be the priests, it could be prophets, the judges, etc. Okay? And so we're going to see a drastic change in how the people are led and what is going to be set up. Now, here's one of the most significant things about this starting point right here. Okay? This is the kickoff for the next 500 years of the monarchy. This is going to be the start of what is going to take the nation all the way till it effectively ends in 586. Okay? So that's what we're talking about here. This is the beginning of that history, which is significant in terms of Old Testament history, literature, prophecy, all of that good stuff. Okay? Now, I know when the remnant comes back with Ezra and Nehemiah, that the nation, there is a remnant, and it is a shadow of what the nation used to be. But do you all even remember when they rebuilt what the old generation did when they saw the temple? They wept. Why? Do you remember why? Well, it was because it was a shadow of what they remembered it being before their captivity. Okay? And so this is going to take us all the way basically to the end of the nation. And then we're going to have roughly a 400-year period of silence where nothing's going on or seems to be going on. Okay? And then we're going to usher in a new system of leadership and government. Okay? The other thing that it does is that by moving to the dynastic monarchy is that it's going to establish Jerusalem as the capital. And the location of the temple is now going to be a permanent location. So, right now, the ark and the tabernacle are in a place called Shiloh. And for about 300 years, that is where the ark and where the people worship is. Okay? We know that the ark was never set up to be a permanent thing. For those of us, we know our Bibles. We know that Solomon is going to build a temple. But again, that is all established and set up because of this setup of the monarchy. Okay? Now, the thing to me that is the most amazing about this point in Israel's history is while they are asking for an earthly king because they want to be like what? Somebody said it earlier. They want to be like the other nations. Whose throne is going to be established as part of this ask? Whose throne is going to be established? Both of you are right. The Davidic throne is established, but it is ultimately Christ that will sit on that, as we know. And so this is incredibly important in terms of understanding as a Christian how we got to Jesus sitting on David's throne. And as we look at this history, we're going to see how all of this unravels. And it's kind of like the layers of an onion being peeled back. Okay? So that's the purpose, is to set up all of this right here. Place of worship, the true throne of the true king, and it's going to be a monarchy as opposed to just kind of God picking random people throughout history to act as his emissary. Okay, so what are the themes of the book? Well, man, and that is so small. My apologies. I'll make sure I get that changed in the next one. Okay, first and foremost, it is the Lord who is the true king. Exodus 15:18. It is said there all the way back in Exodus that God is enthroned in eternity. 1 Samuel 4:4, he is enthroned in the cherubim. Okay, when it talks about the ark. Okay. To continue on that, any earthly king is in subjection to him. 1 Samuel 12:14, at Samuel's farewell address, he states this. when Nathan confronts David in 2 Samuel 12:9, again, he talks about God being the true king, and this idea that it is ultimately him that is in control. God's providential guidance runs throughout this book as well. Hannah, she is an amazing woman that Jason will talk about on next Wednesday night. Samuel, of course, we're talking about here. David, we see all not only the direct prophecies and everything that was involved with him, but again, this idea of providence, and even Saul. The scoundrel that he was, does anybody, in 1 Samuel 9:16, does anybody remember what he saves God's people from? It was that group of people that just was a thorn in their side. Anybody remember? Pardon me? The Philistines. So, I know I'm throwing a lot at you tonight, but we'll get through this. Okay, so Romans 8:28, all things work together for those who love the Lord. And so that is his providential care that we are going to see move throughout this book. And then lastly on here is the sovereign will and power of God. So one of the themes that we are going to see repeated over and over and over in this book is that God opposes the proud but exalts the humble. Okay? And we're going to see that between Hannah and Peninnah, Saul and David, David and Goliath, the Philistines and Israel, etc. Okay? And so what do we see in this book? We're going to see a barren woman whose grief can only be soothed by the Lord. We're going to see what a real and true mother's love looks like as it relates to God. We're going to see passive priests and evil sons. We're going to see the last of the judges, who has a great mob name, Sammy the Butcher. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, wait till you get there. He was hardcore. We're going to see the designated meeting place of God among the people captured by Israel's enemy. And that just doesn't, on the surface, seem right. We're going to see God's wrath on a pagan society. We're going to see the true king pushed aside. We're going to see Israel's golden boy take the throne. Contrast that with a scrappy teen who models his heart after God. We're going to see what I believe is the basis or the template for what a beautiful friendship looks like. We're going to see several women who are amazing stories in here. And this one in particular, that through her wise counsel, she stays the hand that was bent on bloodshed. We're going to see the death of a beloved leader. We're even going to see contact from the Hadean realm, which is unique to this book. And then we're going to see the death of a king and a best friend. And ultimately, what we're going to see is that we're going to see ourselves. Okay? Yes, this is a story of history, and it is impressive. And I think it's foundational for us as believers. But really, history is the story of people. And I'm hoping two things that we will take away from our study here is that there's two things that we will see. We will see ourselves in these people, whether good or bad. We've all got good and we've all got bad within us. And even more importantly, what I want us to see is Jesus in this, because he's in there. He's in there. And so between lowly and lofty people, men and women, old and young, we'll have groups, individuals, we'll have wise, we'll have foolish, we'll see restraint, we'll see aggression, we're going to see righteousness, wickedness, we're going to see determination, we're going to see laziness. We're going to see what leadership looks like and what leadership doesn't or shouldn't look like. Okay? And so it is a book that is rich. So, I love the Bible Project's overviews. They do such a good job, and for whatever reason, this type of medium or media seems to do well. Before we jump in here real quick for a 7-minute video, does anybody have any questions or comments? Because this probably will take us to the very end. Okay? Again, I know there's a lot of facts and stuff thrown out, but it does set the stage. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit the play on this, and we'll sit down here.
The books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. They're two separate books in our modern Bibles, but that division is due simply to scroll length. It was originally written as one coherent story. We're just going to cover the book of 1 Samuel in this video. So after Israel was rescued from slavery in Egypt, they made a covenant with God at Mount Sinai and eventually came into the Promised Land. And there, Israel was supposed to be faithful to God and obey the covenant commands. Before the book of Samuel, Judges showed how Israel failed at that task big time. It was a period of moral chaos, and it showed Israel's need for wise, faithful leaders. The book of Samuel provides an answer to that need. The book of Samuel's story focuses on three main characters: the prophet Samuel, where the book gets its name, and then King Saul, and after that, King David. And all three of them transitioned Israel from a group of tribes ruled by judges into a unified kingdom ruled by King David in Jerusalem. And the book of Samuel has a fascinating design that weaves the story of these three characters together in four main parts. Samuel, he's the key leader and prophet in the first section of the book. But then he also plays a key role in the next section, which is Saul's story, and it's told in two movements: Saul's rise to power and then his failures. And the second part is about his downfall and his tragic death. And then the drama of Saul's demise is matched by David's exciting rise to power. And then David's story is told in two movements. First, he rides the wave of his success, followed by his own tragic failure and the slow self-destruction of his family and then his kingdom. The book concludes with an epilogue that reflects back over the whole story. So let's dive in and see how this all unfolds. Part 1 picks up from the chaos of the book of Judges, and we're introduced to a touching story about a woman named Hannah. And she's grieved because she has never been able to have children. And by God's grace, she finally has a son named Samuel. And in joy, she sings this amazing poem in chapter 2. And the poem is all about how God opposes the proud and exalts the humble, about how despite tragedies and human evil, God is working out his purposes in history. And also it's about how God will one day raise up an anointed king for his people. Now, Hannah's poem has been placed here at the beginning of the book to introduce these key themes that we're going to see throughout the whole story, like the next one. Samuel grows up and becomes a great prophet and leader for the people of Israel, at the same time that the Philistines rise to power as Israel's arch nemesis. And in this crucial battle, the Israelites get arrogant, and instead of praying and asking God for help, they trot out the Ark of the Covenant as this kind of magic trophy that will automatically grant them victory in battle. And so because of their arrogant presumption, God allows Israel to lose the battle, and the Ark is stolen. So the Philistines, they take the Ark, and they place it in the temple of their god, Dagon. And then the God of Israel defeats the Philistines and the god Dagon without an army by sending plagues on the people. And then the Philistines don't want the Ark anymore, obviously, and they send it back to Israel. And the point of this little story seems to be this: God is not Israel's trophy, and he opposes pride among the Philistines, but also among his own people. And so Israel needs to remain humble and obedient if they want to experience God's covenant blessing, which opens up into the next large section. The Israelites come to Samuel and they say, hey, we want a king like all the other nations have. Go find one for us. And so Samuel, he's kind of ticked off and he goes to consult with God. And God says, yes, their motives are all wrong, but if a king is what they want, give them one. And so we're introduced to the figure of Saul. Now, Saul is a tragic figure because he begins full of promise. He's tall, he's good looking, he's a perfect candidate for a king. But he has deep character flaws. He's dishonest, he lacks integrity, and he seems incapable of acknowledging his own mistakes. And so these flaws become his downfall. He wins some battles at the beginning, but his flaws run so deep, he eventually disqualifies himself by blatantly disobeying God's commands. And so the aging Samuel confronts Saul and Israel. He had warned the people that they would only benefit from a king who's humble and faithful to God. Otherwise, the kings of Israel will bring ruin. So he informs Saul that God is going to raise up a new king to replace him. And so Saul's downfall begins. as God at the same time is working behind the scenes to raise up that new king. It's an insignificant shepherd boy named David. He's the least likely candidate to be king, but the famous story of David and Goliath shows that God's choice of David is not based on his family status, but simply on his radical and humble trust in the God of Israel. And so this story embodies all of the themes of Hannah's poem. Proud Saul and Goliath are brought low, while humble David is exalted. From here, we watch Saul slowly descend into madness, while David rises to power. So David starts working for Saul as a general, and he's winning all of the battles, and he's also winning all of the fame. And so Saul gets jealous, and he starts chasing David around, hunting him, trying to kill him. David's done nothing wrong. And so David simply runs and waits in the wilderness. And here we see David's true character. He has multiple opportunities to kill Saul, but he doesn't. He simply trusts that despite Saul's evil, God will raise up a king for his people. What's interesting, too, is that many of the poems of David that you find in the book of Psalms are linked to this very period of his life, and they all express the same attitude of trust. And so this section of the book ends with Saul coming to a grisly death after losing a battle with the Philistines. 1 Samuel tells some of the most intricate, well-told stories you find anywhere in the Bible, and the characters Saul and David, they're portrayed very realistically. And the author's putting them forward as character studies so that you can find yourself in them. So in Saul's story, we see a warning. It's crucial that we reflect on our own character flaws and how they harm us and other people. And with God's help, we need to humble ourselves and deal with our dark side so that Saul's story doesn't become ours. David, on the other hand, is presented as an example of patience and trust in God's timing in our lives. And so he's running in the wilderness, being chased by Saul. David had every reason to think that God had abandoned him, but that's not what he thinks. And so David's story encourages us to trust that despite human evil, God is working out his purposes to oppose the proud and to exalt the humble. And that's what 1 Samuel is all about.
Thanks, everybody, for your attention tonight. For next Wednesday night, we will do chapters 1 through 3 on Hannah, the story there of Hannah and the birth of Samuel. And so appreciate everybody's attention and look forward to the study this quarter.